You asked for it, so here it is. The unfair battle between the Apple 13-inch MacBook Pro M1 and the HP Omen. Now the question is, which laptop is it unfair to? Take a guess in the comments below before we get into this video. I have run each of these laptops through 14 plus creator-focused benchmarks covering video editing in Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, motion design, graphic design, photo editing, and more. Let's get rocking! If you're new to the channel, my name is Benji Kaiser. This is where you're going to find the best tech and tools for creative professionals. Now, if you're curious about the exact pricing of the MacBook Pro or the HP Omen as we're going through this video, or maybe the availability, you can head down in the description below and click one of those links. Now, if you do make a purchase of those links, I will get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. And that's what keeps this channel alive and the helpful content coming your way. Jumping right into the build quality, both laptops have slightly different appearances. First off, I am not surprised to see the MacBook Pro M1 with its continued aluminum finish and silver Apple logo. Although I must admit, I sure do miss the glowing Apple logo on the previous 2015 MacBook Pro. If you know much about my channel, I've recommended that one ad nauseum. And if you're curious, I no longer recommend that one. And so if you're curious about why, you can click the YouTube cards above to find out. After this video, of course. Now, I'm guessing they removed that, glowing Apple logo to make the laptop slightly thinner and lighter, which is totally understandable. The HP Omen, on the other hand, has a deep gray matte top cover and iridescent shape. Both look great, but I must say that the HP Omen stands out as unique, while the MacBook Pro tackles that more, professional look. Both have solid build quality, but the MacBook Pro stands out to be the better built overall. Plus, they have a reputation of historically being the best built computers over the past 25 years. So take that for what it is. Still slightly agree with that because they just do have a strong reputation of lasting quite a bit longer, maybe 2 to 3 years longer on consistency. Maybe there's some anomalies with the laptops last 10 to 15 to 20 years, but that's not the norm in my opinion. Regarding the build construction of the HP Omen, it contains some aluminum found on the keyboard deck, whereas the MacBook Pro M1 has a complete aluminum build, excluding the hinge and the keys and different supporting elements on the laptop. So as far as tough is concerned, the MacBook Pro 13 is a tougher laptop of the two. Now regarding the ports on each of the laptops, the MacBook Pro M1 is one of the least port-equipped laptops on the market, whereas the HP Omen has a plethora of ports. So if you want options, get the HP Omen. Otherwise, you'll be on that dongle life, which for some people is not a huge deal. So with that, it's truly a personal preference when it comes to selecting the ports, selecting a laptop based on ports, should I say. As I open the lid on each of these laptops, I am able to do so with one hand. The hinges are smooth and strong. There's only a slight bit of screen flex on the HP Omen with the dual hinge setup, while the MacBook Pro has no screen flex due to that singular hinge spanning the entire bottom portion of the bezel of the screen. Both are solid and sturdy, but once again, Apple takes the prize for build and sturdiness because of that singular hinge. Now, what about the ventilation on each of these laptops? The HP Omen has generous vents for cooling the laptop. It has a vent behind the keyboard deck, on top of the keyboard deck, on the bottom cover of the chassis, and right side panel. This is very different from the MacBook Pro M1, which only has one vent, which is behind the keyboard deck. So the question begs, which one runs cooler and quieter? At idle, the MacBook Pro M1 and the HP Omen have no fan noise, which is a good sign. They're not doing anything. I would hope the fans don't kick on, but some laptops do. During the web browsing, the HP Omen reaches around 45 decibels. Once you start surfing the internet and streaming some video, that kicks on and starts to run. But the MacBook Pro M1 again has no fan noise during web browsing, which is very nice, especially if you want a quiet laptop. During the 4K video editing export in Premiere Pro, the MacBook Pro M1 is still unaudible and has no fan kick on, whereas the HP Omen gets pretty loud at 59 decibels, while also producing a slight coil whine, which could be annoying depending on your ear sensitivity. Once again, the DaVinci Resolve export, the fans kick on for the HP Omen at 65 decibels, but they do not kick on for the MacBook Pro M1, which is really awesome. Now, we're going to see later in this video the benchmarks, the performance benchmarks, if that's impacted because the fan isn't kicking on and maybe the laptop isn't ramping up and using as much power, so on and so forth. So we'll check that out later in the video. Now for the Photoshop benchmark test, the MacBook Pro M1 had 0 decibels of fan noise, and the HP Omen ranged from 45 decibels to 61 decibels, depending on the task it was performing. Now to check how well the fans did cooling the components during these tests, here are the benchmark results. So far, it seems that the MacBook Pro is winning on every front. The build quality is off the charts, and it runs cool and quiet in some of the most critical creator apps. Now, before you go frolicking down the path to pick up your brand new MacBook Pro M1, you need to stick around for the performance benchmarks. Here you will see exactly where the MacBook Pro M1 thrives and where the HP Omen wins out. But before we get into that, there are a few more details I want to cover, including screen quality. The Apple MacBook Pro M1 comes with a 13.3-inch Retina display that can reach 303 nits at full brightness. The M1 pulls off some solid color accuracy, snagging a color gamut range of 100% sRGB, 89% Adobe RGB, and 100% DCI-P3 at an average delta E of 1.18, which is great. That means it's color accurate. The HP Omen comes with a 15.6-inch Full HD display that can reach 320 nits at full brightness, with a color gamut range of 99% sRGB, 72% Adobe RGB, and 72% DCI-P3, all at an average delta E of 4.42. Now, although both screens are pretty close in color gamut range, the benchmark that sets them apart is the delta E rating. As you can see, the delta E rating on the MacBook Pro M1 is 1.18, which is a really solid indicator of not only an expansive color gamut range, but excellent color accuracy when the colors are reproduced on the screen within that range. In plain English, even though these two screens have close color gamut ranges, you will find that the MacBook Pro M1 is going to be more accurately produce the screens based on the lower delta E rating of 1.18 versus the HP Omen's 4.42 rating. Now, I filmed a whole video on color gamut range and delta E color accuracy. If you're interested, you can check it out after this video is complete. It'll be linked up in the YouTube cards above. Now, with all that in mind, once again, the winner is the MacBook Pro M1. Transitioning to the more, feelies, the keyboard on the HP Omen is absolutely delightful. The soft touch keys are more magical than Apple's Magic keyboards. They are soft, quiet, and have a firm, snappy key press. I really dig the HP Omen's keyboard, and if you've seen my channel recently, you know I rant about the joy of it. Rant and joy, those really go together. I celebrate it, whatever you want to say. As I turn my focus towards the MacBook Pro M1, the keyboard is really good as well. I just really like the feel of the HP Omen keyboard. The MacBook Pro M1 also comes with a soft touch matte finish on the keys that feels very nice beneath my fingers. The backlighting on the keys is excellent, and the firm, snappy key press is quite agreeable. It's very nice. I'm so glad that Apple went back to the scissor switch keyboard and ditched the butterfly keyboard. It was a great move back a year or two so. Both the HP Omen and the MacBook Pro M1 come with an all-in-one trackpad on the keyboard deck with the click built in. However, the HP Omen has a manual click, whereas the M1 totes Apple's vibration click. So basically, the trackpad isn't manually activated by the click from the mechanism moving. Rather, the amount of force that is applied to the trackpad causes a vibration that feels like a click, and then in turn, you're clicking in the operating system. Now, I have noticed that this causes occasional errors when dragging and dropping items or conducting video edits when you're like dragging and dropping on the timeline, but Apple has really fine-tuned the trackpad, and I do like it a lot. There's still some things, because it's not a manual mechanism, it still glitches sometimes, I found personally. So if you want ever so slightly more consistent dragging and dropping, I would go for the HP Omen, which has a great tacky matte finish on the surface of the trackpad. My hat is off to HP for their trackpad. The design on the HP Omen for sure is stellar. I really like it. Here is an audio sample of me using both keyboards and trackpads, so you know what to expect. If you're needing a laptop to attend virtual meetings, then either laptop will work. They both come with 720p webcams. In this head-to-head battle, you could pick either one if that's a concern to you. Now, the on-the-go capability of each of these laptops, the HP Omen weighs in at 5.43 pounds and at a thickness of 0.89 inches thick, whereas the MacBook Pro weighs in at 3 pounds at a thickness of 0.61 inches thick. Now, concerning battery life, the HP Omen will get roughly 5 to 6 hours of web browsing battery life and about 3 to 4 hours of design and video editing battery life out of its 70.9 watt-hour battery. Whereas the MacBook Pro M1 will get roughly 14 hours of web browsing and about 10 to 11 hours of design and video editing with its 58.2 watt-hour battery. If you're enjoying this video and getting some value and you want to save money on your next laptop or desktop PC purchase, then you don't want to miss out on my texting community, 850-306-4644. A lot of things will be happening over there, but most importantly, I'm excited about the weekly tech deals I will be sending exclusively to my texting community. Every week, you'll get a fresh lineup of the latest deals on discounted laptops delivered straight to your phone via text. Plus, there's a few ways to engage over there with me directly, ask me questions, chat, whatever it might be. So 850-306-4644. Hope to see you over there in the community. On to the main event, the performance benchmarking test between the HP Omen and the Apple MacBook Pro M1. The HP Omen I'm reviewing comes with the AMD Ryzen 7 4800H with 8 cores and 16 threads, the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 Ti with 6 gigs of VRAM, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 256 gig SSD, whereas the Apple MacBook Pro M1 comes with Apple's M1 8-core 8-thread chip with the 8-core GPU plus 16-core neural engine, 8 gigs of RAM, and 512 gig SSD. Now, kicking things off, we're going to jump into the simulated benchmark tools to check how well each of these laptops handle Cinebench and Geekbench. Both laptops have 8 cores, but the HP Omen has 16 threads, where the M1 does not. It is, just straight 8 cores, 8 threads, no hyper-threading. Here are those benchmarks. Now, getting out of the simulated tests and onto some real-world apps, let's take a look to see how well these two laptops will perform in Adobe's Design Suite by benchmarking them in the Puget Systems Photoshop benchmark. Both laptops perform well in Photoshop. The HP Omen pulled out slightly ahead with a score of 579, while the MacBook Pro was beat out by a mere 10 points and scored a 565. So really, you're splitting hairs on this one. Both are going to be great. Now you're going to be more quiet with the MacBook Pro M1, and it'll be a bigger screen with the HP Omen. So here it's really preferential in my opinion. Moving on to motion design, I'm using Puget Systems After Effects benchmark. Per the chart, you can see that the HP Omen pulled ahead of the MacBook Pro M1 again, but this time quite a bit more. The HP Omen scored a 744 over the MacBook Pro M1's 641. Please note that the MacBook Pro M1 After Effects results came from a friend with a 16 gig model. I was unable to run the Puget test on the 8 gigs of RAM. So keep in mind, if you're going to do After Effects, I would personally recommend upgrading to 16 gigs of RAM to really make space for these more intensive motion design programs such as After Effects. Now on to my favorite benchmark, video editing. First, I'm going to start off with a playback test. For this test, I'm using a 9-minute 4K clip, adding some motion graphics, and then playing it back in the timeline at full quality. This full clip contains 16,177 frames in total, with 7,240 of those frames being motion graphics. During this test, the HP Omen saw drop frame rates as follows. At full quality, 1,185, at half quality, 126, and at fourth quality, 0 drop frames. During the test, the Apple MacBook Pro M1 saw drop frame rates as follows: 5,481 at full quality, 375 at half quality, and 0 drop frames at fourth quality. Now, considering that I was only running Premiere Pro during these tests, you may see slightly higher drop frame rates while multitasking, but you can easily switch to half or fourth quality to continue to get smooth playback in the timeline. Concerning the rendering of the motion design effects, I was able to render out the 7,240 frames in just 3 minutes and 45 seconds using the HP Omen, and only a bit slower at 7 minutes and 43 seconds for the MacBook Pro M1. Now, moving on to the 4K export test, I'm going to take a 9-minute 4K clip, place it into Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve, then export both out at 1080p and 4K YouTube settings. Now, keep in mind, I am using the free version of DaVinci Resolve. For the HP Omen Premiere Pro 4K to 4K export, we see that done in 4 minutes and 13 seconds. For the MacBook Pro M1, 5 minutes and 51 seconds. For the HP Omen 4K to 1080p export out of Premiere Pro, 3 minutes and 14 seconds. For the MacBook Pro M1, 9 minutes and 15 seconds. For the DaVinci Resolve 4K to 4K export, HP Omen 9 minutes and 3 seconds, MacBook Pro M1 7 minutes and 45 seconds. And for the 4K to 1080p out of DaVinci Resolve, the HP Omen 4 minutes and 21 seconds, the MacBook Pro M1 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Now, regarding the thermal performance during the 4K video edit, you can see that the HP Omen is running at 78 degrees Celsius during the stabilized temps, and the MacBook Pro M1 is running way cooler at 66 degrees Celsius. All right, so with that in mind, you're going to get a lot cooler, a lot quieter performance out of the MacBook Pro M1. But as you can see, regarding playback, the HP Omen just kills it. So with that in mind, let's talk about my recommendations for each one of these laptops. If you're a hardcore 4K or 6K video editor, then without a doubt, I would steer you towards the HP Omen. Now, the reason why is because we did basic 4K video editing for this test, okay? And with that in mind, when you start stacking 4K clips, so let's say you have like 3 camera angles, so you have a lot of 4K data inside of your project, it's gonna slow down that MacBook Pro M1 even more. Whereas the HP Omen ran it really, really well. And especially if you're somebody who wants to really do a multicam sequence, I would recommend you going for the HP Omen with the 2060 GPU, the RTX 2060 from NVIDIA. I'll link that one in the description below as well, so you can kind of compare prices. But if you're going to be a serious 4K or 6K video editor, I'd go for the HP Omen with an RTX 2060. Okay, the new MacBook Pro M1 simply does not have that type of power and the ability the HP Omen has. However, the HP Omen is noisy and does not come with a thin and light chassis of the Apple MacBook Pro M1. So if you're just a light video editor, maybe 1080p, sometimes some 4K, or you're, Adobe Design Suite user, man, Apple MacBook Pro M1 all the way. I think it's a great machine. It's quiet. It's cool. It's a real winner. Without a doubt, for real-world applications, the HP Omen is currently faster for motion designers and video editors who are working on some big, serious projects. Now, will things change when the creator apps go Apple Silicon? We will see. But for now, my recommendation still leans towards the HP Omen. If you're someone that occasionally conducts 4K video edits, like I said, the MacBook Pro could be suitable for you. But really, man, it's that sweet spot for designers and light video editors. Plus, you can be, on the go a lot longer with that 14-ish hours of battery life. So it's a really great laptop for the specific user that I'm talking about. Now, if you're curious about the exact pricing, again, I'll link those in the description below. If you do make a purchase, I'll get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. That's what keeps this channel alive and the helpful content coming your way. If you want more videos about the HP Omen or the MacBook Pro M1, you can click or tap the screen over here. Otherwise, keep editing, keep creating, keep designing. My name is Benji Kaiser, and I'll see you here in the next video.